heard you refer to Julian, and you said Julian A. I was unaware you can't say his name on Twitter.
Well,
Is that
well,
what's going on?
no.
Because I was going to be saying his whole name the entire time.
On YouTube, here's the thing, because this happened to
You'll
us
get shadow banned.
at HardLens Media. You'll either get your video, you'll not get a copyright, you'll get a community strike, or you'll be going against the guidelines because they viewed his name as on par as a swear word or a racial slur, or either that a guy named Edward who snowed in somewhere on the Asian continent. That's what I call a good old Ed.
YouTube doesn't like Assange. Yeah. And I mean, listen, I host a show with Assange in the title. I know this all too well. I mean, I don't know if you put Assange in the title of the video, but if you did, this video will be shadow banned. They will not give it any algorithm help at all.
Let me bring up a couple of articles here that we're going to be covering. This first one here, this is from South China Morning Post, and it's titled, "As U.S. Australian Ties Deepen, Are Calls to Free Julian Assange Just Mandatory Rhetoric?" And I guess the article is addressing what has happened. So Australia, it has been calling on the U.S. to free. Yeah, exactly. Softly. Exactly. And that's sort of what this article is talking about. Like, is it just kind of like just saying something, you're not really trying to make an effort? So that's the question we're going to be kind of addressing with the article. But they sort of, called for the U.S. to free Assange, and that's sort of where we're starting at now. Misty, I'll lean on you to answer this question. When you say sort of, why do you describe it that way? What did Australia do to call for it, and why do you describe it that way?
All right, so before I start, it's very likely I'm going to rant here. I apologize in advance. Please tell me to shut up if I go on for too long. But here's what's going on. So Anthony Albanese is the current Prime Minister of Australia, and he fucking sucks. So while he was trying to get elected, while he was stumping for votes, he very publicly came out in support of Julian Assange, saying enough is enough. It's time to pull this to a close, all of that good stuff. The moment he took office, surprise, surprise, he suddenly got very quiet. He faced a ton of pressure from Julian Assange supporters in Australia, which shout out to the Australian contingent of the Assange crew. They're fucking awesome. They get it done. They have a bipartisan group in Parliament in Australia of multiple different people who speak on behalf of Julian Assange. I mean, across the board, they have numerous members. I think there's maybe up to like 15, 20 of them now. So the Australian contingent of Assange supporters have done amazing work. But Anthony Albanese faced growing criticism as he went silent after taking office. He then came forward with some bullshit, oh, well, I can't. Okay, first of all, they call megaphones loudhailers in Australia. So he said, I don't think now's the time for us to bring out our loudhailers. It's time for quiet diplomacy. Get the fuck out of here. This case has been happening in silence for far too long. It needs literally all of the noise. It needs all of the megaphones. And so the idea that he's trying to pretend as if he can silently, like really nicely ask the United States to please, pretty please, won't you let Julian Assange go? That's ridiculous. And, he continued to be very silent. He's continued to face a ton of pressure. He continues to be an absolute schmuck on this issue. And so that pressure has been growing over time. He just recently, Antony Blinken, sorry, turd that he is, just recently visited Australia and was standing next to Penny Wong, a senator in Australia, and denigrated Julian Assange, did all of the bullshit smears. He put lives at risk, all of that bullshit that they've been trying to claim that's long been debunked by the United States government. And Penny Wong stood there in silence and said nothing. And Antony Blinken was like, we're not going to let him go, whatever. And they did nothing. She stood there silently, didn't defend Julian Assange, who, by the way, is an Australian citizen. And so they've done nothing. And now the pressure is mounting even further. And meanwhile, all of this is going on. And the United States and Australia they're doing AUKUS. They've got all these military deals. And at any point, Anthony Albanese could use that leverage to get Julian Assange freed from prison. And he does not, because he's a coward, and because, as Caitlin Johnston says, Australia is the United States basement gimp. And he has no courage whatsoever to stand up against the United States power. He's not going to do it. And it is disgusting. It's despicable. Julian Assange is an Australian citizen. He's never been a citizen of the United States. And the idea that we think that we can charge him under our U.S. Espionage Act while affording him none of the protections of the First Amendment is atrocious. And basically what this amounts to is the United States is seeking global jurisdiction over information and journalism. And the idea that people are not terrified by that prospect is beyond my ability to comprehend. Okay, I'm done.
Misty, so you're telling me that it sounds like to me Australia of any country is the best position to have anything meaningful change
without question
for Julian, like, because the U.S. needs them in this war game, which they need. Australia, they have to have that. Why don't they're like the squad of countries, huh? Why don't these people use their power when they have it? These countries, is it similar to why the squad wouldn't? You know, they had this thing with Nancy Pelosi where they really could have extracted a lot of things, reduced the speaker's power in the same way that the Freedom Caucus did with Kevin McCarthy. But we're seeing it on a large scale with a country just sort of having, but not willing to use their leverage for their own citizen. It's quite despicable to me. But let me read some of this article, not all of it. We'll read a little bit. So here goes some of the bullet points. Actually, let's skip the bullet points and just read some of the article here. Australian senators have piled on the criticism of the United States following its latest refusal to release Julian Assange. But experts say their censure will amount to little as Canberra seeks deeper relations with Washington. Some lawmakers and commentaries are agitated that despite having offered to house more American troops, Canberra was unable to leverage its relationship with Washington at last week's Australian-U.S. ministerial consultations to end Assange incarceration. While the two countries did agree at the annual ASMAN forum to a quote combined intelligence center, quote end quote, that would embed more U.S. intelligence personnel within Australia, there were also signs of growing impatience at Washington's lack of quid pro quo. When asked last week why American military officer Chelsea Manning, whose leaked classified U.S. records to Assange WikiLeaks database had been freed while the Australian journalist continued to languish in jail, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said Assange had, quote, risked very serious harm, end quote, to national security, and asked Australians to understand U.S. sensitivities. What do you think he means by that, Misty? What do you think he means by sensitivities? I know what it is, but what do you think he means there? And more broadly, what do you think of Australia's response, or at least their Anthony Blinken's response to the question of Chelsea Manning is the one who got the information, so why is she free and not Julian Assange? What do you think of the question and also the response of Anthony Blinken? And then we'll bring in Kit for your response.
Well, obviously, that is a very legitimate question. Chelsea Manning is an American citizen, was part of the United States military, had some form of allegiance, I guess, or had at least signed on to some sort of a contract or an expectation of responsibility when she signed up for the military. She was, in fact, the whistleblower. She was the person who leaked the documentation. She's free. She has been released from prison. Was in prison for far too long, was tortured, all of that stuff. But she has now been released from prison. And Julian Assange is a journalist. He's a publisher, which should be protected under the First Amendment and should be protected by international law. And so the idea that Chelsea Manning is free and Julian Assange continues to remain in prison is ridiculous. On its face, he should have never been in prison to begin with. He was performing journalistic activities. There's no question about it. There is no question about it. And in fact, in his journalistic activities, WikiLeaks has never gotten it wrong. They've never had to retract a single thing they've ever published. Show me another news outlet with that kind of record. I'll wait. It doesn't exist. And so the idea that he's still in prison for this, and the U.S. sensitivities, that's basically Julian Assange embarrassed us and we want to destroy him. Not just because we want to destroy Julian Assange as a person, but because we want to send a warning to all other journalists and whistleblowers across the globe. Julian Assange is essentially being used as the proverbial head on a stake outside the castle walls. He's being used as the threat to all other journalists. And it's already, I think we have already seen an unbelievable chilling effect across journalism and whistleblowing. And that is the intention that they have here. And we know that. They've admitted to it. We know that they have had plots to murder him. We know that, I mean, there's all of this stuff that has been able to continue. It's mind-blowing to me. It is mind-blowing to me that we are still here in the year 2023, given everything that we know. Their main witness admitted to fabricating his testimony against Julian Assange. They were revealed to be plotting to murder or kidnap him out of the Ecuadorian embassy under Trump, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, all of these things that have happened that have completely they spied on him, including his conversations with his legal team. That alone should be enough to have this case thrown out a window and lit on fire. That is a gross violation of his rights. Imagine you're going into court against the world's largest superpower, and the whole time they've been spying on your conversations with your defense team. That's not a fair trial. You can't get a fair trial. It's absurd to think that you can. So the idea that this continues is absurd. And it really is just a matter of making an example out of him. And the sensitivities are, he embarrassed us. Now we got to destroy him.
Yeah. And Kit?
It's really hard to do a follow-up to Misty because she's been leading the charge on Julian Assange and speaking truth to power, and one of the very few people that has been giving detailed information to the public, because the corporate media will not do proper coverage. And I encourage all of you to please follow Misty Winston's work, because she has been one of, again, the leading voices calling for the freedom of Julian Assange. Let me just tell all of you this, because again, there's nothing I could add that Misty has not stated already. But if he is to be extradited here to this country under the Espionage Act, which is an antiquated law from the First World War, that's it for free speech. I don't care where you stand on the political spectrum, be it Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green, whatever. I don't care what generation you're part of, the color of your skin, or who the hell you worship. You do realize that when he is extradited, when he is put behind bars, that is it for free speech. That is it for any platform. There'll be no one left to speak for you, because we will be all put on the chopping block. This man is not an American citizen. This man has wrongly been in prison for so many years now. He's been away from his friends, his loved one, his co-workers. His 2 kids have not seen their father. Enough is enough. He's been tortured. Donald Trump, hey, congratulations. You surrounded yourself with a lot of yes people, willingly, I might add, who then convinced you to put that innocent man behind bars. Trump, you talk about free speech. Well, guess what? You help put the nail in the coffin if this happens, because the Biden-Harris administration that supposedly said it cares about free speech wants him extradited here. So in many ways, you could reverse this, Trump, if you want to do a whole full-on pardon. But I know that because of his body language, I forget who was it that interviewed him. I believe it was Candace Owen or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. His body language. He was like, and you could tell he knew he screwed up.
Yeah.
Just like, well, some people said he did things wrong. Some people said he did things right.
Fucking coward.
He folded his arms like this. And when you fold your arms like this, that means you're hiding. You're hiding yourself. So look, he doesn't deserve to be tortured anymore. Enough is enough. He needs to go home. And this is something everyone across the world can agree with. Whether you like Julian Assange or not, his imprisonment is unjust. It's time for him to be home with his family, and a long recovery for him to mentally recover from this devastating trauma that has happened to him both mentally and physically. The man will never be the same again.
No.
All right. And again, adding to Misty's point, hey, CNN, Fox News, New York Times, CBS, ABC, Washington Post, Huffington Post. What's it like knowing that WikiLeaks never had to retract the story, but yet all of you did? What does it say about all of you and WikiLeaks? It tells me that WikiLeaks can get the job done and none of you can't. Oh, and by the way, F you, BuzzFeed and Vice.
Well, and can I also just really quickly add to that all of those outlets that you just mentioned were very happy to use the work of WikiLeaks to make their own careers, to make money, to win awards. And then as soon as it was inconvenient to them, they were so quick to throw him under the bus. And they have been, especially The Guardian, fuck The Guardian. They have spent the past decade plus throwing Julian Assange under the bus and to their own detriment. If you think it's not coming for you, it is. And I'm not just talking about media. It's coming for all of us. If you publish anything, and by publish, I mean tweet, blog, blog, say, speak, write, it can come for you too. This opens a Pandora's box that we cannot close. There is no closing this. Once this precedent has been set, as Kit said, it's over for free speech and press freedom, period.
Yeah. Let me read another just to close this out, because there is a couple of more paragraphs here that would add to the conversation. Some observers called Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, this is who you were speaking of earlier, and its administration a subservient client government of the U.S. following Blinken's remark. Senators in Australia hit at the implication of Assange case for the freedom of speech and accused the U.S. of covering up war crimes, including its illegal invasion of Iraq. And here's a quote, make no mistake, the situation Mr. Assange finds himself in is not in any way about his actions threatening U.S. national security, Senator Nick McKim said in Australia's parliament on Wednesday last week, calling the case a matter of public importance. And I could not agree more with that description.
And can I just really quickly too?
Yeah, go ahead, jump in there.
There's also a whistleblower in Australia who also revealed the Australians' complicity and participation in war crimes in Afghanistan. His name is David McBride. He is currently facing a trial of his own. It starts in November. He's a good friend of mine. He is an unbelievably courageous dude. So if you guys could please throw him some support as well. He's not one to, same thing with Julian. Julian was never one to advocate for himself. He would always advocate for others. And in fact, we mentioned Snowden, Julian Assange. Edward Snowden was not Julian Assange's source. He did not work with Julian Assange. He worked with Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras. But when Julian Assange found out that Ed Snowden was in trouble, he was the one that reached out to him to get him to safety at great personal risk, I might add. So it's not even his source, but he went out of his way to make sure that Snowden can get to safety. That's the kind of guy Julian Assange is. And so David McBride, I've noticed this in my time working on this and other cases. The people like this, the Assanges, the McBrides, the Daniel Hales, the John Kiriakus, they very rarely advocate or speak on themselves. They are always about others. So I just wanted to bring up David McBride. Please go and support him as well. Again, he faces trial in November, and he's facing decades in prison as well. He was a military lawyer, and he tried to go through proper channels, as they always say, and as most of these whistleblowers have tried to do. It didn't work out, and so he went public, and he is now in the fight for his life as well. So I just want to bring that up and ask for you guys to support him.
If I could just quickly chime in.
Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
When we say war crimes, I would ask people to go back and look at what WikiLeaks revealed under the Bush administration. Well, they revealed it after the Bush administration, but what happened during our war against the people of Iraq, how U.S. service members were looking at the cold-blooded murder of innocent people like it was a video game.
Yeah.
Like, I watched that footage once and felt sick.
It's hard.
So the trauma that has been inflicted on non-Christian, mostly brown and black people in the Middle East and Africa by the U.S. and sometimes with NATO war machine is immeasurable.
Yeah.
WikiLeaks was able to give a window into two things. One, the brutality that is the U.S. imperial and European imperial war machine and how bloody and murderous it is. And two, the inner machinations behind the scenes. Like, it came out that like we were spying on our allies. So like we're just full of shit. So those are the things, those are the quote unquote crimes that he revealed our inhumanity to other human beings on this planet. And that was a heroic act. Misty and I spoke a while back on her show about the trauma being inflicted upon Julian in prison The United Nations considers anything over 15 days in solitary confinement to be torture. So the UK government is torturing, the Crown is torturing Julian in prison. The United States is behind that torture. The man had a stroke in prison, being denied access to your family members. All of that is torture. So we are massively violating human rights. But it's no surprise because the United States routinely incarcerates and puts in solitary confinement poor, mostly Black and brown people in our carceral state of the United States. So I would say, like, under that metric, we are perhaps one of, if not the worst. I know how I feel, but I'm just trying to, like, parse it out for some others that aren't there yet. The biggest violator of human rights in the world.
Yes.
Human rights issue. And the third piece is, yet again, the United States government and its allies and its tankies, let's use that word, in the media, the mainstream legacy media, hate free speech. Mm-hmm. They do. And it's like, if you speak up, there may be journalists who would like to write about it, but they have to make a decision. If I push a story that goes against the imperial order, I'm done. My career is finished. These are the choices that people are forced to make, which is why independent media is so important. But again, why people like Alexei, last name N, don't want places like the Gray Zone out there. So they don't allow the legacy media to cover it, and they complain if anybody supports the independent media. They're enemies of free speech. And it's just sad. It's heartbreaking. I know Caitlin Johnstone.
Yay, Kate.
She did that beautiful video.
Yes. Oh, it makes me cry every time.
I know. I can only watch that once too. And I was like, I can't believe you did it. It was so gorgeous. Yeah. For Julian and what he means. But listen, I do believe this. There's a time when our imprisoned traitors will be our heroes.
Yeah.
I don't know how far down it is, but it always happens.
It would be very cool if we could start supporting our truth tellers in real time instead of making martyrs out of them. That's what frustrates me. We do this all the time. We did it with Ellsberg. We did it with Kiriakou. We're doing it now with Julian Assange. And also, just really quickly, as Anthony Zenkus was just saying, what he was speaking about, the footage that he was talking about, if you have not seen it, it's called Collateral Murder. It is about a 38-minute video of 2 Apache helicopters committing atrocious war crimes on video for all to see. It is murder. And as John Pilger once called it, it's 360 degrees of murder. It's very difficult to watch. In my opinion, it's even more difficult to listen to. The just blasé nature, as he said, it sounds as if they're playing a video game. It sounds as if they're playing like Call of Duty or something. They're like, light them up, and shouldn't have brought there are 2 kids in the van. Shouldn't have brought kids to a gunfight. They didn't. A guy happened upon a massacre and stopped to render aid, and then they fired upon them as well, which is called a double tap, and it is a war crime. Also, in terms of the stroke, Julian Assange had a stroke via while he was on video conference. They wouldn't let him attend his own hearings, and so he was watching via video conference. And literally, you cannot write this. Couldn't make it up if I tried. As he's sitting there having a mini stroke, what the prosecution was talking about in the courtroom was that he's a malingerer, that he's faking his health issues so that he doesn't have to face accountability. Literally, as he's having a mini stroke, y'all. That's what we're dealing with here. And then also, I just wanted to briefly mention too that as much as Anthony Albanese sucks on this issue, I did mention that there is a bipartisan group of senators in Australia that have spoken at length in Julian Assange's defense. And just recently, they held a hearing on this issue, and a multitude of senators gave brilliant speeches. David Shoebridge was my favorite. It's only about 5 minutes long. You can find it very easily on YouTube. I can send CJ the link maybe, and he can throw it in the chat. But it is David Shoebridge condenses it down to about 5 minutes, where he really lays in sharp relief the importance of this case. And that's a really good video. I've tweeted it out too. Some of you who follow me may have seen it. But yeah, it's a brilliant speech. And, you know, we're very close to losing this fight. He's inches from being extradited.
And what is this video? Set it up before I play it. It's
I just sent CJ a video because Zenk was talking about the things that WikiLeaks exposed, which collateral murder was one of those things. But this is an interview from Democracy Now! With Julian Assange. It's very brief, but he just speaks about one of the most horrific things. And we're talking about rape, torture, murder, you know, just the absolute worst possible things you can imagine. That's what WikiLeaks exposed. And instead of the people responsible for those heinous acts being imprisoned and put on trial, it's the guy that exposed them, who's been tortured for now over a decade and is facing 175 years in prison. So this video is just a brief example of one of many things that they exposed.
These thousands and thousands of documents. What most surprised you? Is there a story or stories, a category that has most disturbed you?
Well, it's the big picture of the war, that nearly all the deaths are in incidences that kill just one or two people. A little girl on the street who would, in the yellow dress, who would frequently go to collect candy and so on from U.S. troops. One day, a tank goes past, and for an inexplicable reason, a shooter comes out of the U.S. tank and blows her away. There are just so many.
A little girl.
A little girl.
Let me pause that. Go ahead.
Yeah, a little girl. This is just one of many things. A little girl who U.S. troops knew. She would regularly go up to them and they would give her candy. And this is something they did all the time. They would very often, you know, give out candy or give out, you know, treats or food or whatever. And it was really just a setup for them to attack you. And they've done that numerous times. And this little girl was just going down the street to go collect her candy that she was expecting from U.S. soldiers. And instead, they blew her away in the streets. And that's, again, just one of hundreds, maybe thousands of examples of the things that WikiLeaks exposed.
Just terrible. We're gonna end there. We got super chats, but I do got a couple of quick response stories to kind of read, to go over with us.
I'm sorry, I got so fired up.
That's okay. Don't apologize.
That's great. That's
Never
great.
that. Don't you ever apologize. How dare you apologize?
That was great. And I forgot to shout this out before we move. Just to shout out this article, we're not going to read it. Co-founder Ben & Jerry's wrote an article in Newsweek, and it's entitled, "President Biden is Trampling the Bill of Rights by Prosecuting Julian Assange." It's a great op-ed. It was written a couple of weeks ago, so it's not brand new, but I just wanted to shout it out and for people to go check out or Google it on Newsweek. So there you go.